Matt, and sorry, I forgot to record. So I just hit the record button so everyone knows I am now recording. The only ones that would have to front the street are just the front unit. So these one back here, just the front.
Right.
These two.
I mean, I think the flexibility to do either or still makes sense. I mean, even if you didn't have the front door on those units, it's obvious where the main access for all those units is. So you could still easily find the front door. The biggest issue with having the front door out there is if that's a major street or a street with lots of traffic, you know, it might be a sales issue. Someone may not want their front door facing the major right-of-way where there's more traffic, and it might make more sense to take it off of the interior private drive.
And that's a good discussion for the group. I would say then a majority of our developers will just front to the internal access drive. And I worry too about these being, you know, in between residential developments that have been there where their front doors all face the street. And then again, we're just seeing the side of buildings because developers are going to possibly just, you know, put the same unit facing internal to because I mean, technically then on these front two white ones, it could be the back of the building. And I don't know that that really creates a great streetscape. And I know I'm inserting my opinion a little bit too much, but well, I've seen a lot of applications submitted where we call them kind of cheap and cheerful. They don't necessarily.
I mean, maybe it's just maybe it's a comment either fronting or 90 degrees to the street so that we know that that's not going to be the back or some creative language like that possibly.
Okay. Other comments?
So it looks like Audrey and then Mike, and then there are a couple folks after that.
Okay.
Just a quick thought on the fire part. Maybe that 150-foot length could start at past some other access area. So like if you have one where the shared drive either has a turnaround built into it at some point, but any part beyond that is where the 150 starts instead of at the right of way.
Yeah, and I want to work with them and see if we can get some type of flexibility, because the 150 works, you know, when we're talking about an acre property, but if we're going to be real flexible and allow these on larger properties, there's got to be hopefully some way we can get past 150 feet, but I can't promise. I need to definitely work with them.
Yeah, and I do like the idea of a little bit of flexibility with the front door. I see what you mean as far as the having, you don't want back sides and just sides of buildings, but maybe even that, you know, one of them or the most prominent or something, not most prominent, that's just, maybe one of them has to front the street, if any, but allow some flexibility because there should be a pretty obvious street, whether it's a shared driveway or not. Yeah, just not that everyone that is on frontage has to go to the street. Anyway, 2 cents.
Thank you, Audrey.
Mike and then Kathy Austin.
Hey, good morning. First, I just want to thank you, Pauline, for actually having pictures and site plans. This helps so much, I think, to understand the challenges that are in front of the builders and the designers. Two, what kind of jumps out at me, I see 2 different types of projects. I see the projects that Polish is involved with. I actually drove by the project this morning, the project you had up on your screen, and I also drove by a 3-story townhouse project off of Empire, just to get a feel for what these look like in real life up close. And then I look back at Audrey's challenge, and there's kind of 2 questions. One, I kind of want to know what she ended up trying to do. And the other is, we have, as I think Kathy mentioned last week, we have very few vacant lots left, infill lots. And unfortunately, they're the dogs. They're the ones that have become very hard to site plan around. And I can't help but wonder, are we trying to make this so difficult by trying to make sure every single vacant lot, no matter what the frontage is, the topography is, work for every one of the wide variety of housing uses? So, and then we adopt a code that makes the exception work. Then we apply that code, though, to all the development projects that that Polish do day in and day out. It just seems like we're trying to do one size fits all. And is that making this code so watered down that you can just about do anything you want? So Audrey, what's your solution?
Well, I'm going to jump in on that one. I agree, Mike. The intent of proposing the shared court is to provide as much flexibility as possible. So that's right. I'm just getting to, can we have a front door face the street? I'm going to propose, a narrow drive of 24 feet. I'm going to propose exceeding 150 feet with the fire and the engineering department. I'm proposing no minimum lot sizes. I'm just almost begging to say, is there a way we can have a front door face the street so that it just carries on the streetscape that is potentially, in most cases, already there. And we are starting to see applications come in where I hear there's not a lot of infill development available. We are seeing houses get torn down so that these and other types of developments can get built. So there are some perfect square properties, especially in our older parts of town, where they're going to be tearing down houses and building these. And it would be disappointing where all those houses front the street and then we allow the sides of the buildings, when we're allowing a lot of flexibility here. Sorry if I'm overreaching. Karna?
Sorry, mute. How do you, with this option, how do you deal with Kathy Austin's project, where you're kind of going up a hill and there's really no street frontage?
Let me just go back to hers. So she has street frontage right here, and all these units actually front it.
Okay. All right, but you're basically going to be walking up a long driveway to get it, right? And that's okay?
I know she sent me some better pictures, I believe. And
Yeah,
Kathy,
this is all parking in front of those units. It's a parking lot, correct, where you're on both sides. It's a double loaded parking lot. The street dead ends when it hits the parking lot. So it's actually, but they are facing, as you drive into the development, you are seeing the front of the units. Those 5 units face frontwards.
And that's okay? I want to make sure that you can build this. That's mine.
Thank you, Karna.
Well,
Yeah,
I
and I
just
think-
think that with topography, we're going to have more and more of this type of stuff.
well, remember, we still have to get to cottage clusters. So when you look at this development in its entirety, it reminds me more of a cluster, even though they're attached, versus your standard townhome development.
Okay, but where you're saying with your proposal, you can build this.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And we can make it very clear too that because the parent parcel again has frontage. It's just saying if the units front onto a street, face the street, then they have to have a front door facing the street.
Got it.
So I think we have Kathy, then Moe.
Thank you, Lynn. And I apologize. I was on a conference listening to Stacey Abrams and I couldn't break myself away to be here on time. So my apologies. A question regarding the front doors facing the street. Pauline, I had sent you long ago a T-court type of design that I had where the sides of the units were facing the street, but there was a lot of architectural articulation. And I know this isn't a T court, so I'm just wondering, in the T court, are the doors required to face the public street?
I will have to look. A T court's a little bit different because it
Mhm.
looks and acts like a street. It has
Mhm.
sidewalks. It's over 40 feet wide. So in a sense, they are facing a street.
Okay,
This is
that
a
makes
driveway.
sense.
Yeah, what I'm
Okay.
proposing here is more like a driveway.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Well,
and
I
so-
understand your goal, but I do think it's a little difficult to have the front door face the street in all circumstances. Perhaps there could be language similar to what we had some time before about diagonal, being at a 45 degree to the street. So it's both facing the new driveway as well as the public street, or some language about architectural articulation, windows, overhangs, porches, something. Like for instance, this one, the doors are not facing the side, they're facing the interior driveway of what you're showing right now. And yet it's very clear where the doors are. So I think that I appreciate that already we have a tremendous amount of flexibility. But I do think just a little bit more flexibility regarding the door orientation, either being facing the street or 45 degrees to the street, or providing significant architectural articulation to the street, such as a wraparound porch or, a lot of windows, something to that effect, would get you the street friendly frontage without being quite so doctrinaire. Oh, and I also wanted to mention the issue about the 150 feet. I've done a lot of work with fire departments over the years about that. So the hoses are 150 feet. The truck can back up 150 feet. So if you put an interior fire hydrant as well as a turnaround in an interior in a larger size parcel, that usually sets the next 150 feet, as Audrey was suggesting. So I think you're going to find there is some flexibility, but those are the two things. They can only back up 150 feet and the hose is 150 feet. Okay, I'll be quiet.
Thanks, Kathy. It looks like we have Moe next, and then Karna, and then Scott.
Thank you so much, Pauline, for putting this proposal together. I think it's a really good compromise, especially since, if everyone remembers, what the code is now for townhouses is, I believe that every unit must face the street. So, if we're thinking about how development's going to occur for the next 30 years, and like Pauline is saying, some of it might be in our downtown core, in areas that are right now very walkable. I think it is more than reasonable to expect developers to have just the ones that are on the street face the front. And it's not about knowing where the door is or not, it's about that walkability piece. And so if there's, a big driveway cut through a sidewalk and you can see that there's front doors down that private drive, that doesn't make it feel more walkable to keep walking on that sidewalk straightforward. So, I go back to this idea that it's sort of like a tragedy of the commons a little bit, where, every developer wants to build to exactly what the customer is going to pay the most for, that's going to make the price the highest, and, what they can fit on site. But if everyone does that, and it means all doors are facing an interior parking lot or private drive, then that's just not good for the city as a whole.
Okay, Scott is next. Kathy, I lowered your hand a second ago. If you actually meant to have it up, then put it back up and you can go after Scott.
No,
So
you're a dear.
Okay.
Thank you.
Scott, then Bill.
Hey, so yeah, I wanted to just briefly talk about the 150 feet thing. I think maybe we should just take that whole thing out. it's guided by fire access. That's something else. I feel like having development code following or being kind of a duplicate of the fire code is a little messy. I mean, if you're going to develop these, you're going to have to adhere to a fire code. Anyways, I just don't think it's really needed. I mean, it's a nice guide to know if you're putting one of these together that they have a 150-foot limit for how far a fire truck is able to go in without getting a hammerhead or a turnaround. But that should be dealt with in fire code. I think we should just take that section out. And the other thing about the front doors facing the street, I think I like the idea of trying to prevent front doors from facing a private street that's kind of the opposite of the main drag. I don't really see too much of a problem with it being at a 90 to the public street. I think about like just general neighborhood developments with houses on corners. There's always going to be one side where it's the side of the house. And so, you know, if it was two public streets, we wouldn't have, you know, you wouldn't say, I guess you don't have to have the front door facing the larger public street. But yeah, I wouldn't want it to be able to face completely away. And if there's other parts of the code that deal with, and I'm trying to remember off the top of my head how we've dealt with this in the past, and I think we talked about it a month ago in this, but just if there's some language that we can put in there about covered porches or maybe a distance from the street or something with sight lines, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that. But some of these, I would think the front door facing this shared court, I think is a fine idea. As far as the kind of, I don't know what you call it, the dingbat development, where it's the garages all along the first floor and then all the living spaces are up above. I think that one, you had that photo up when yeah, that one. This is, when we look at the other pictures with the kind of private drives and shared courts and that kind of thing, everyone can look at those developments and it, you know, you could feel like the sense of community and it's a nice neighborhood street and it acts like a neighborhood street. This is not as appealing, and I know it's a cost thing, but I'm kind of thinking if we do allow these raised kind of living spaces above these garage, it maybe that, like, I wouldn't consider this a street frontage. So if we're giving exceptions to townhomes or houses that instead of fronting on a public street, they could front on a shared court, I don't see this as accomplishing that same goal. So I'm just throwing it out there and seeing what other people have to say about that, because, you know, I understand a lot of like what Moe talks about of kind of the fabric of the street frontage. This doesn't seem to accomplish that very well.
Just a real quick question on that. Pauline, is this picture meant to have, like, are we supposed to imagine that the end units do face the street?
Yeah, I need to find if I can, this might have just been all they offered with their picture of the end units on here. Because, I mean, if you don't have a requirement, you can get this.
Yeah, there's a book, and I can't remember what planning book it is. I think it's Suburban Nation, and I think it might be that one. And someone they rank or they give a score to a different kind of urban fabric or street frontage, and you know, empty warehouses rank low. Downtown kind of street frontages rank high, and nice neighborhoods with front porches and with houses that are kind of closer to the street, they rank high. And it's funny because that's where I learned the term dingbat, and he ranks that as some of the absolute lowest kind of lowest ranking for pleasurable street frontage is that, and it's it's similar to basically a wall of garages. Anyways,
so I think this one here is a good example of what it looks like having your front doors face the street. Like it's the entrance to these two units. If these doors weren't here and it was just a big, in my opinion, wall with windows, and you're walking down and on each side of this development is somebody's front door, it just seems like all of a sudden you just have the side of houses. And what I'm hearing is that's okay. I just think that why not say have the front door face the street? Is it really going to be a deal breaker to do this?
Okay, we have Bill, then Karna and Matt, if that's okay, Pauline.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Please.
All right, this is Bill Bernardi. In terms of the door issue, I would just ask that at some point, maybe we line up side by side what we've already said for other forms, for duplexes and triplexes and so forth, because I think we talked about this at length at one point and came up with some options. It seems to me there ought to be some consistency. You shouldn't end up having to choose between a duplex and a townhome arrangement because of whether there's a door required on facing the street. So that's my only point. I think we ought to, we've been dealing with these one topic at a time: duplexes, then triplexes, then quads, now townhomes. But at some point, it'd be nice to line them up side by side on some of these design issues and see if there's consistency, regardless of what the decision is. So that's my point.
Thank you, Bill.
Karna, then Matt.
So this left-hand picture here with the 90-degree angle door, is that okay?
This one?
Yes.
The street's right here, so it's facing the street.
So the street is in front of that yard right there?
Yeah, like see my cursor would be right here. Okay. So this is the private access drive, and this whole unit faces the street.
So I live in a townhouse community on a private street, and all of our front doors are on the private street, but on the main street, the backyards hit the main street. Are we saying that that can't be built now? Because we have people walking through constantly to get to the river. I mean, it's like a major thoroughfare for walking. They don't use the actual sidewalk on the main street.
So I would say in these two cases, if there's homes fronting the street next door to them for the entire block, and then all of a sudden you see the backyards here, that would not be allowed with what's being proposed, because we're talking about lot frontage.
Okay, so in my case, I think I'm in RM or RH. Would that make a difference?
No. And I'm not sure how those got built, because even today, under the code, I mean, if you front a lot, you can't have a 6-foot fence in the first 10 feet. You can only have a 3.5-foot fence because it's your front setback, not your backyard.
I'm going to send you the plat just because I'm interested.
Okay.
Yeah, Karna causing all the trouble here, huh?
It's going to be a tough one to support the backyards in the front.
Yeah. Okay, Matt is next.
You're muted, Matt.
Thank you. So I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. So when we're saying private street or shared access, I mean, is with that being, I mean, if that is a tract or a private street,
Tract.
is there, okay, so it's not, it's considered a right of way where someone could choose.
No,
where
it's
to
a tract.
Because I guess that's the biggest point that I go back to is the one that Scott brought up earlier. Whereas, you know, with a corner lot at a street corner, you know, you can face the door at a 90-degree to that other more main street and it's acceptable, but here we're saying it's not. You know, and so in those situations, we have a fence that goes along the sidewalk and it's acceptable, but in this instance, it's not. It just feels like we're putting a little bit of a double standard out there, in my opinion, and the flexibility would be warranted. But I realize that it's not always the most attractive thing. But typically it's not going to be right. The house isn't going to be right up next to the sidewalk anyways. So you do have a little bit of, you know, you still have a 10-foot setback facing that street. It looks like the ones in the picture there, obviously on the right, are closer than that, it appears. So they wouldn't be right up on the street like that. So yeah, in my opinion, it's something where I agree it's not the most attractive, but still in instances where it may make sense, the flexibility would be nice to have.
And again, this is, you know, incorporating middle housing into existing neighborhoods. So just think about when you're all developers incorporating this type of development into an existing, you know, probably single family detached residential neighborhood, because the whole idea here is incorporate middle housing into all neighborhoods.
Is it my turn?
Yeah, Kathy and then Moe.
Thanks. I just wanted to agree with Bill Bernardi regarding consistency. And I think that we addressed some of these concerns on some of the other unit types that we were talking about. And I thought we came up with some pretty good solutions. And so it might be reasonable to take a pause and think about that, about addressing, you know, I understand the goal and I think we can reach the goal, but I think that the language is probably good to be consistent with how we're addressing the duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes. So I like the idea of kind of looking at that side by side. As my thinking is that as long as there is a clear entryway into the homes, that it's either a porch or a patio with a, you know, with an overhang, the door is either facing the street or perpendicular or 45-degree. Any of those things can be done attractively and address the street. So by just saying the door has to face the street, I think is a little too rigid.
So I'll we were going to talk again about duplex, triplex, and fourplex when it comes to the front doors and garages. But if my memory serves me correctly, we were more in support, and this is just of the garage doors being able to be snout houses, and that the front doors could be 20 feet back. So we can compare duplexes and triplexes to townhomes in this type of situation, but the garages, just so I am clear on these, are not going to be accessing the street. They're all going to be accessing the private drive.
No, I agree. I'm not suggesting that we follow the same language for the garage, but I do think that having some kind of language that allows either a front porch or architectural articulation, and that the door can either face the street, face the new court, or be at a diagonal, or have language that it cannot be the back of the house, something to that effect, so that we can be flexible. I will tell you, where you put the front door has a big impact on the internal design of how the first floor of a unit is laid out. And to always have to have it on the front corner, like you're showing on the left, or in the middle in the front on the right, isn't always going to work. given the size of the lot, the shape of the lot, and how the unit works. It's just very restrictive from an architectural point of view.
And I think, you know, I've shown you some good examples here. I think my next PowerPoint is going to probably show some examples that are not good. And just to start thinking about those and if we're okay with those, incorporating those into existing neighborhoods.
Okay, if it's okay, Pauline, we have 3 more with hands up, Moe, Scott, and Jesse. But what I'd like to do, just in the interest of time, is maybe take these 3, and then if there are new comments, that's fine, but let's move forward. Does that sound okay, Pauline, after these 3?
Yes, no, that sounds
okay.
Good.
So
Thanks.
Moe, you're next, Scott and Jesse.
I just wanted to talk about real quickly the idea of a gridded street with a neighborhood that, you know, maybe a lot is on the less busy street or whatever, with the door facing that way. That is different from a private drive, which is basically a dead end for someone who is walking past. So to me, it's not the same thing to say that, you know, just because I don't think the private drive, which is essentially a dead end to anyone who doesn't live there, should be treated the same as a gridded street. And I just think everyone should really pay attention to what Pauline is saying to us. She sees these applications come in every day, and Pauline is our expert in the code, trying to keep the city, you know, working well from a big picture perspective. So I would really hope that people take that into consideration.
Okay, Scott, then Jesse.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about what Bill and Kathy had talked about in terms of the language for kind of front door or even garage. I feel like these issues should almost be separate from duplex, triplex, townhome, and they should be somewhere else in the code. And then those duplex, triplex, or shared courtyard or whatever can then reference that, just so that there's a consistency across our development code. And maybe with those front doors and garages and things like that, there's different, maybe a few different acceptable choices that a developer can have. And then in a row house, for instance, it might say refer to the you know, the front door design standards, and you can use A, B, and D or something like that. Because I feel like there's a lot of consistency that we could find throughout all these developments, and maybe some might not work for others. But I don't like the idea of kind of burying the front door in a specific type of development. Yeah, I feel like if it was separated from the specific types of development and put somewhere else in the code, then they reference to it, it might be kind of easier to understand and also to update.
Okay, Jesse.
Yeah, I think I agree with Kathy and Bill, but I think maybe it'd be useful to see bad examples of this, because to me, I agree with the idea that like trying to design something where the front door is always on the street is really difficult. And I know that we're trying to keep our streetscape walkable and what have you, but to me, keeping that, being able to have the front door not be on the street is really important. So I guess I'll just put my hand down and maybe wait to see what these bad examples look like.
And that's it for comments. I think we're all curious what Pauline has pulled together.
Oh, I think I hear majority of not requiring the front door to face the street. So I will just draft the code with that in mind. I'm going to definitely probably provide some bad examples for duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and these type of developments. so that we're aware of what we're drafting, what we can get. And that will include, you know, presentations of front doors and garages as well. And we'll talk, I'll bring those when we wrap up cottage clusters, and then we still have that whole list of extra items, which includes the garage door discussion. I'll include it as part of that to go through. But for the meantime, when I start drafting this particular section, there won't be a front door requirement for townhomes. So the next part of the presentation is, I think, on to townhomes. Let me pull up my comparison chart. Okay. And that's probably really small, so let me try blowing it up. Okay, so last week or 2 weeks ago, when we talked about townhomes, we did not have a proposed lot size. And then we got down to density, and we all agreed that the density was extremely confusing to understand. And I talked to some of the planners in the office too, and they asked a good question. So wonder if you do a large development, and remember, for duplexes, triplexes, and quads, we have lot sizes. We're not proposing, because we can't, density requirements. But wonder if you do like a large development, and you have a mix of townhomes and some duplexes and some single family, and everything seems, and you have to figure out density and you have to figure out lot sizes. Well, if we treat townhomes completely different when it comes to density than we do for single family and duplexes and triplexes, that they were asked, how do you figure out density? When it says you can have 7.3 units to the acre, however, all this is exempt, but the townhomes aren't exempt from density, and neither are single family homes. And the way we calculate density is we take into account street right-of-ways that'll be created. Well, how do you take into account street right-of-ways that are being created if a duplex is going to front it, because then they don't count towards density? So this may sound complicated the way I'm explaining it. This is how the planners see it. It's going to be very, very complicated. So one thought would be is to treat townhomes the way we're treating duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, and look at the minimum lot size requirement and not have a maximum on density. And then that way, when we do a large development, we're not looking at density anymore because we can't for a majority of the uses anyways. We're simply saying you can have all these, you can have these number of lots based on their lot sizes. Does that make sense to everyone? Kathy?
Yeah, I think that's probably a decent way of going. The plot plan that you showed of my project also included the lot sizes for each of those townhomes. And just so everybody knows, the townhomes are about 1180 square feet. So they're pretty small. So if you were to include a front porch and a rear porch and a little bit of yard area, that's kind of what, just as an example of the lot size that you could look at. And for the interior ones, I don't recall exactly what size that wound up being. Maybe it was a 1,200 square foot lot or something. But anyway, I think that is one way of going. I know, I understand what you're saying. If you have a development that has a mix of unit types, how difficult it would be to calculate that density. So I think that's an okay approach. I don't have any negative things to say about doing it that way.
One, if we want some consistency, even with garage doors or front doors, it seems like lot sizes would be one and density would be one. That way, when you go through the code, you're not all of a sudden surprised that, oh, that's weird. Townhomes have a density, but the other uses don't. So if we went with lot sizes, you can see up here on the screen what we have today, which in the standard density residential is 2,000, medium 1,600, and high density is 1,200 square feet. We need to amend those to be consistent with the minimum compliance middle column here, which is may not be greater than 1,500 square feet. And I think you can also average them so that the average is at least 1,500 square feet. I mean, this for RH, the high density, we're already at 12. This would be reducing the minimum and standard density residential, and then creating a lot size for the low density residential of minimum of 1,500. But we're not married to this number. If there's another number of just doing like the high density of 1,200 square feet in every zone, that's one thing. Or we can have separate lot sizes depending on the zone. Matt, when you do your townhomes, so I know Polish does quite a few of them, what's your average lot size?
I would say, I mean, really here in town, we really just have those alley load types that we do, and our typical lot size for our middle units are 20 by 80, so 1,600 square feet.
And is that because that's what the minimum lot size is for that zone, or is that just your typical?
That's our typical. I mean, that's what is required. That's as small as we can go and still meet setback requirements. For garages in the rear, we like 20-foot driveways, you know, for parking, so that cars aren't in the alleys. In addition to the 2-car garages, and then we go 10 feet off the front minimum. So yeah, that 1,600 is kind of, you know, for middle units, you know, add another 4 feet, so you'd be 24 by 80 on the end units with the 4-foot setbacks that we typically use in our master plan communities.
Pauline, if it's okay, once Matt is done, Ethan has a hand up and we might want to hear from him.
Sure. Hi, Ethan.
Hey everyone, Ethan Stuckmeyer here from DLCD. I just wanted to kind of clarify the density, and I think this really goes along with what you were saying, Pauline, about you know, the funkiness about having a density maximum for townhomes and not having that for other types of middle housing. The way that we were thinking about this when we were doing the rulemaking for this was we wanted to provide at least some sort of backstop for cities to say, look, there is a limit at how small these lots can be for townhomes, because, you know, if we're allowing 3 stories, potentially even up to 3.5, 4-story townhome units, you know, those building footprints can get pretty small. And so we wanted to have at least some availability for cities to say, look, there's just some sort of maximum here. So that's why that 25 units an acre made its way in there for townhouses. But I think your approach to minimum lot sizes, using that to kind of regulate the density in a roundabout way is a good one, and I think something that most cities will be doing.
Thanks, Ethan. Kathy?
Yeah, I was just calculating out that the townhouse example of mine that you showed earlier, we probably had 1220 as our lot sizes as average. And I like your idea of doing an average, because obviously end units may have a bigger lot than the center units, and then doing it as a minimum. So if you said a minimum average of 1,500, I think you'll accomplish what you're looking to do. And if it's an average, that allows, for instance, say some lots are a little bit larger because you're providing an accessible dwelling unit with a bedroom on the first floor, but the rest of them all have all their bedrooms upstairs. And it allows you to average that in with the rest of the smaller units. So I would urge us to consider averages and then set, you know, a minimum lot size.
And then Mike?
Yeah, I was on my desktop looking at tax map for the 3-story townhouses I saw being built there off of Empire. The lot sizes on some of these are only 900 square feet. If nobody has walked by those, you might want to go look at it. It's like 3-story buildings, narrow driveways, very small lots. That might see how, I'd be curious how that compares to our final statistics, our citing standards when we're all said and done, and go look at that one to see if that's something you feel good about.
Hey, Mike, do you have any sort of narrowing of an address on Empire? Not the actual address, but sort of roughly where that is. I have not been up there for a while.
Yeah, it's at the corner of Boyd Acres Road and Empire. It's
Got it. Okay.
a new area that just has been very recently been developed. The Polish homes are only, townhouses are only 2-story. This one has 3-story components. It's very interesting. You need to go look at it.
Are they dark brown?
I believe so. Well, like a dark gray more than dark brown. Yeah, it's got multiple colors, but mostly dark brown, dark gray or black.
Yeah, it's the northwest intersection.
Yeah. Yep. It'd be good to go kick the ground a little bit and see what these things look like.
Yeah, I think they're turning out pretty nice for that unique lot, especially on that busy intersection. Any other thoughts on this?
It looks like Bill, Mike, I'm not sure if you were done. I don't want to cut you off if you had more to say. If you are done, then Bill is next.
Yeah, I just think that not trying to apply density maximums to townhouses makes sense here. So I would agree with what Pauline was proposing in terms of, specifying lot sizes, probably based on zones. And the idea of, as the minimum standards indicate here, having an average minimum makes sense. So I would support those ideas. I mean, unless we, can see an example of where that would really create a problem. Thanks.
I think that's it for comments on this.
So the minimum compliance is 1,500. RH high density is well below that at 12. So we could definitely keep that. Is there support for the low, standard, and medium density of just using the minimum compliance of 1,500? That reduces all 3 of those down. For RM, it reduces the lot size down by 1,000. And this is, obviously they can be averaged. And then in the standard, it reduces it by 500 square feet. And then the RL, it's pretty much creating a new lot size for townhomes of an average of 1,500. So any thoughts? I know we just talked about how we support this idea, but I just want to get a feeling for this, if there's support for using those lot sizes that I just mentioned.
Maybe just take a vote.
Okay. If we're in support, please raise your hand of using 1,200 average for high density and 1,500 square feet average for the other zones.
And just a reminder, this is votes for committee members, stakeholder committee members. So I'll try to cross-check, Pauline, but. Yeah, I think it's a clear majority without even counting.
Okay, good. All right, so we did lot size, street frontage, density, setbacks. We haven't ever, that I know of, have issues with our setbacks. They're the same as single family detached dwellings, duplexes, triplexes, except for obviously when they're attached. They're 20 feet for the garage. Side yard is 5 feet when they're not attached to a unit. Front is 10 and the rear is 5. Are we okay moving forward with the setbacks that we have today, which are, I believe, consistent with what is allowed in the minimum compliance? Let's raise our hand if we're okay moving forward with the setbacks we have today. I see thumbs up. That's new.
Yeah, we're it looks like folks are good with that proposal.
All right. And height, I am meeting, I believe it's next Tuesday with Scott and Kathy from our stakeholder advisory group to discuss height. And I also invited Kathleen, who's one of our planning techs, to join because she is a pro at understanding our height measurement that we use today, because she reviews a lot of plans that come in for building permits. So we'll bring back height if there's going to be a proposal on how we measure height at our next meeting. But in the meantime, with this height requirement, what we've done with duplexes, triplexes, and quads for height is 30 feet in the RS. We took out the 1998 reference, and RM is now 35 feet, and then RH would be 45 feet. Can we raise our hands if we're in support with being consistent with?
Oh, sorry, Pauline.
That's
Mo
okay. I
has
said
a
Mo.
hand up. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't a question. Oh, okay. Never mind. Sorry.
Okay.
Go back to you.
So I'm gonna use the height revisions that we've made for the other uses and carry them forward for the townhomes. So let's jump into parking. So parking today for townhomes is 2 spaces per dwelling unit. So we treat them just like a single family detached dwelling unit. The minimum compliance says a city may not require more than 1 off-street parking space per townhouse, and that you can count on street towards credit. The model code states the minimum number of required off-street parking spaces for a townhouse is 1 space per unit, so same as minimum compliance, and that they can be on individual lots or in a shared parking area or a common tract, and that you can also count on street towards credits. So it looks like what is consistent between the model code and the minimum compliance is it is 1 space per unit. So is there any hands on that?
One hand. Oh, here we go. Bill first, then Kathy.
Yeah, I would support the model code here. I think there ought to be flexibility on how it's achieved, but you know, I mean, we're at the moment, at least, we require 2 spaces for a single family detached house. To say that there shouldn't be at least 1 space for a single family attached, you know, in my mind wouldn't make sense. And I think there ought to be a requirement of at least 1 space. And, you know, I mean, again, if you scale this stuff up, if you get away from the infill situations and you scale this up, which is what has to be done in order to achieve any quantity of middle housing in Bend, there are going to have to be whole developments of townhomes and duplexes and so forth. You know, again, the math just doesn't work if you completely eliminate the standard. I think it's just unfair. And so I would endorse the model code in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And just for the group's awareness, the City Council is going to be holding a work session on doing away with parking minimums. I'm not sure when it's going to, the work session is going to be. So we can propose stuff as part of this package, but it may change depending on the direction that we get from the City Council. Kathy?
Yeah, so column D, the highlighted portion would be my support because, for instance, the project I designed, all the parking was on a separate lot, a common track. So that needs to be in there, I think, to be flexible. And while I'm supportive of eliminating parking minimums entirely, I'm fine supporting this and that the City Council make the final decision.
Thank you, Kathy. Other comments? It almost seems odd that we require, if we go through with all this and it gets adopted, that a single family detached has to provide 2 when a, you know, other townhouse, for example, will only be allowed to have 1. So I don't know, something to think about if we just want to look at parking for single family detached too in the future. Bill?
Well, I was just going to say that's why going back a few meetings, I had proposed, you you know, that this group look at the possibility of recommending to the council that setting a standard of 1 space per dwelling unit citywide. In other words, apply that to single-family homes and apply it to apartments and the whole deal. You know, the average is 1.9 vehicles per household. And it doesn't make any, that's here in Bend, that's nationwide. It doesn't make any difference what the type of housing is. Vehicles are related to households. And no matter how much middle housing is built, we're always going to have more single family homes and more apartments. And so, you know, if we think there's too big a burden, that parking, off-street parking is too big a burden, you know, it really ought to be looked at across the board. But we need to be reasonable and practical. And in my opinion, it is not practical to say that there should be no off-street parking requirement. You know, the parking of private vehicles has always been a private responsibility, and we're talking about shifting that to a public obligation. That's a huge change and a big burden for the public to take on, and something that will need to have a lot of discussion. So I'm glad the council is going to bring it up. I'm disappointed that they're starting with one solution. I think they ought to say, what are the right standards? Not, you know, should we just eliminate all standards?
Thank you, Bill. Who is next, Lynn?
Matt, then Jesse.
Yeah, I kind of like the difference between the 2 and the 1 for single family versus townhome, just because it creates that a little bit of that affordability factor with the townhomes and creates a typical price break between the 2. You know, it encourages developers to go the townhome route because they can make it happen with smaller lots due to the lesser parking requirements. So I don't see an issue with the way either one is written.
That's a good point. Thanks, Matt. Jesse?
I would just disagree with the apartment part of it, just because of the micro apartment code that allows for half a space. We're in the middle of designing one now, and for the lot that we're using, we wouldn't have been able to do the project if we didn't have that in the code.
Kathy, then Mike.
Yeah, I just have to disagree strongly on the idea of 1 parking space per, no matter what size the unit. A studio apartment, a 1-bedroom apartment doesn't need as much parking as a 4-bedroom house on a detached lot. That's ridiculous. I'm sorry. So I think it's appropriate to look at the amount of parking per the size of the units or the number of units. And again, I am supportive of getting rid of all of the requirements, but I understand in this circumstance, it makes sense to do the highlighted portion.
Mike, then Jesse again. Mike, you're muted. I don't know if you're.
Yep, forgot that.
Okay.
I have been exploring the city using our GIS tools, the new tools that have become available online. There's some great tools there if you haven't become familiar with them. It's very easy to see where the majority of our attached housing is, duplexes, triplexes, townhouses, and they're all tend to be clustered in where it's RM zoning. And over the holidays, I went and drove most of those, and I found everybody had a garage. I found one street that didn't had the attached units that didn't have garages, and it looked like it was a 40-year-old single-story type. And as we heard from the builders, They understand that the demographics for Central Oregon is quite a bit different from other communities. People have stuff. And once you have a garage, then do you put the garage so close to the right of way that it becomes a hazard? No, you usually set it back, which then creates the second spot. So I think if you go through a driving tour and look at all what's being built, the market-driven project, you have a garage, you have one space behind the garage that's not on-street parking. The rub comes into these infills where do you build something that has no parking, or there's one garage where it's so close to the street or the alley, it's dangerous to back out into the alley. Where do those people park? Especially as Kathy's mentioned, you can't just have one size fits all. If you have a 4-bedroom and you're renting out 3 bedrooms to make it affordable, where do the other 3 park? We're going to probably hear this argument many times and probably at council. I think we should be very cautious and say, oh, does it really work? If it's just a few infills, perhaps the infill scenario isn't going to be the end of the world because there's just not going to be that much overflow. So, enough said.
I think that's all the hands we have up right now.
All right, so we don't even have to vote. So we're just gonna do the yellow highlighted section for parking and lot coverage. I'll combine this when we talk about lot coverage for duplexes, triplexes, and quads, as well as FAR. But really, I mean, floor area ratio, we don't really use that for townhomes today unless they add an accessory dwelling unit. So for the most part, when we talk about floor area ratio, it's really going to be about the duplexes, triplexes, and quads, if we even go that route, and not just use lot coverage. The areas owned in common are basically the same. We don't require it, but if there is areas owned in common, it has to be taken care of by the homeowners association. So then the design standards, yay, front doors. This talks about the main entrance of a townhome. Each townhome must be within 8 feet of the street facing wall. And I wonder if there is, I was looking at, bear with me. I should have kept it up. Actually, hold on just one second. I have the paper copy before I go through that. They might have, for townhomes, I know they did. Hold on one second. Quads. I'm looking to see if they have pictures in the model code, because it explains it better than I do. And I should have had these pulled up. Let me get to townhomes. 1 second. Ethan, do you remember if they have the front door for townhomes? I'm not seeing it. One more second, sorry. Oh, townhouses. Nope, they don't. Okay, so what is proposed here, and this is saying that it's just your, standard townhome development, not the shared court type developments that we are going to offer as well. But if you just have townhomes, they're not part of a shared court and they have lot frontage. It's saying that the front door has to be within 8 feet of the longest street facing wall. If the lot has public street frontage and either face the street, be at an angle up to 45 degrees from the street, face a common open space or private access or driveway on 2 sides, open onto a porch, and we move that porch down to 20 square feet if we even go this route. Is there interest in talking about the front doors, like we're going to with the duplexes, triplexes, and quads for townhomes?
Got a hand from Bill.
Yeah, I would say yes. Let's just go back to what we talked about before and see if it applies here. It seems like it would. I mean, I don't see a difference between, you know, a duplex and you know, two, you know, shared wall townhomes. They seem pretty similar.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. Kathy?
Yeah, I just want to agree with what Scott had suggested, and that is a reference to another section that addresses front doors, and that would be easily changed if we see that there's problems coming up. But if each of these unit types is referred to that section on the front door, and then we can just deal with the language that is applicable in most of the cases. I don't know if you're open to doing it that way, but rather than repeating and maybe having conflicts or whatever. Now, if it seems like it's not flexible enough, I can back off that suggestion, but I did like Scott's suggestion of just referring to section blah, blah, blah on front doors that everybody can just go to, and it's like, oh yeah, I get it. And there could be a diagram there and whatever. So just
no, we could, I can look at that. The way the code's set up right now is chapter 2.1 is the residential district, and it talks about setbacks and heights and what uses are allowed. And then if you're doing a special use, like or a use of a duplex, triplex, what will be a quad, a townhome, or cottage cluster, it refers you on to chapter 3.6 for their standards that are unique. And we typically place it in 3.6. However, if this group comes up with a front door standard that applies to all of them, I could see that living in in the residential chapter under the design standards, and it wouldn't apply to duplexes. I take that back because we don't have it apply to single family detached. But it is definitely an option that we can do, and even have the pictures that are presented in the model code, which I'll make sure those are part of the presentation when we go through the standards that we still have to get through.
I mean, that seems to me to make the most sense. It addresses Bill's concern, and I think it's an orderly way of doing it. And then if when we're doing the discussion on that, we see, oh, well, maybe it needs to be different for this unit type, we can discuss it there. But it just seems like we should be there and discuss it all at once in one section like that.
Any other comments? Okay, so we'll just move forward with that. Same with so something that they incorporate, and I'll just get a feel from the group because the other ones don't. It's how the model code defines like a townhome unit. And Ethan, if I'm not conveying this, just correct me if I'm not conveying it correctly. Each townhome unit must include one of the following, like a dormer, a balcony, a bay window, an offset, an entry that is recessed, a covered walkway, porch. So these are clear and objective, what I would call them as design standards per unit. We don't have those today. What we do have is eliminating the prominence of the garage and bringing forward the front door. Those were the two important things to the group at the time when we looked at standards, not so much, you know, these architectural additions, because not every house even lends itself to these, especially maybe a more modern home wouldn't have a roof dormer or a bay window. And I've even talked to architects, and they say even with these architectural additions, they can still create an ugly townhouse. So I don't know if there's any thoughts of even diving too much into this or focusing more on garages and front doors, or just not requiring too much of anything. And we all know I support reducing the prominence of the garage. Kathy?
Yeah, I'd get rid of all this. I mean, oh my God, it's architecture by planning, and it's just it sends little steam out of my ears. So I like your idea of not doing this and just addressing the prominence of the garage and the location of the front door and not having all this silly, goofy stuff being required. So that's just my opinion. I guess it's getting late. Maybe I need a new cup of tea or something. I'm sorry to be grumpy, but this is just, I don't like this. So anyway, that's me.
Well, Pauline, I don't, just because we don't have any more hands, I saw a floating thumbs up, but what's unfortunate about this new, emoji situation that we have on Teams is that you can't tell who's doing what. And so anyway, I on occasion I'm seeing the floating thumbs up, but we can't really attribute that to anyone. Maybe you
So it
guys
just floats by?
Yeah, it does, like in the middle of the screen. It's really kind of weird. So I don't know that we got a thumbs up as Kathy was speaking. Now it looks like I was kind of dragging on a little, hoping somebody else would raise their hand, and now we have Scott. So I think that's
good. Thanks, Lynn. Scott?
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on what Kathy said. I mean, I'm not a big fan of these type of requirements generally, because yeah, you could make ugly buildings with all of these, especially if it's just like it must include one of the following. I mean, this isn't going to make a building beautiful. I think focusing on garage door location would be more effective and just easier to design around.
Any other comments? I'm going to hold this group to focusing on reducing the prominence of the garage. Moe?
I agree. I'm fine with getting rid of this stuff as if we instead focus on the garage and the front door.
Thank you, Moe. Okay. Windows, we will carry on when we talk about windows for everything else. And then the driveway standards, I believe the model code probably got their, actually, no. Their driveway standards are definitely not as flexible as ours. So I'm just going to show them to you. So here was if we were to go with the design standards, what that means. So the townhome for the model code is less restrictive when it comes to the driveways. The on-site parking and maneuvering areas cannot exceed 12 feet wide on any lot. Very restrictive. The garage door width does not exceed 12 feet, although I support reducing the prominence of the garage. That is just very narrow. And then the other alternatives is if you can't comply with this, then you have to comply with an arrangement like this one or this one, so that the driveways are in the back of the units. Do I hear any support of looking at this? Whereas our code provides quite a bit of flexibility for townhomes. We did recently just update it with a small group, and to my knowledge, I believe it's been working okay. I believe if I have it here, it's similar to how we treat duplexes, triplexes, and quads, and I can tell you it's flexible without getting into too much detail. Kathy?
Yeah, go with what we have already and not what is proposed in the model code would be my vote.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other comments, so I'm just going to keep going then.
Pauline, Jeff just raised a hand.
Oh, okay, Jeff.
Just real quick, yeah, I agree. I think the bend code, when we were helping the Alphabet Soup committee that developed the model code for townhomes, we gave them some feedback around that. That's a lot of pavement, and it doesn't even really show practical turnarounds on those 2 second examples. So it ends up being, it's a lot more pavement than what they're showing even in the sample. And then in Central Oregon, where are we gonna put the water would be even more challenging.
Good point. Okay, no more hands. All right, so we have 25 minutes to get through cottage clusters. I'm just gonna, I don't understand why my screen does this. Annoying. Okay, I know it's a little bit on the small side, but oh good, Lisa's here. Let me see if I can get her in.
I just admitted her. Let's see. Lisa, if you can hear us, just say hello or raise a hand or something like that. You can try one of the new emojis.
I can hear you now. I lost the feed and I lost the video, so I had to jump off and re-enter. So thanks.
Got it. Okay, glad you're here. Thank you.
Welcome back. Okay, so cottage clusters. Several of us are familiar with what we have in the development code today, which is the cottage housing development section in chapter 3.8. The goal is to keep that because we've been working on amendments over the past couple of years and it's getting used more and more. And I believe in a sense it provides more flexibility than some of the proposals here for what will be called a cottage cluster development. So when I put in under the city code requirements, I'm just showing you what we have today for cottage developments. We're not changing any of that, or we can, but the main thing that we're going to focus on is creating a new chapter or section for cottage clusters. So we'll be looking at the minimum compliance or the model code requirements to help us draft our cottage cluster development. So with the cottage cluster, the numerical standards, so under the minimum compliance, it says the city's not required to set a minimum number of dwelling units in a cottage cluster, but if we want to, we may require 3, 4, or 5 dwelling units in a cluster. A city may but not require greater than 5 units in a cluster. Today, in the Bend code, we allow a maximum of 12, but we don't and a minimum of 4. So the minimum compliance says we can do 3, 4, or 5. And remember, when you do these, you may say a minimum of 3. I'm going to guess that, and I'll look to like Jesse and Audrey who have developed some of them, but there's a lot of requirements for a cottage type housing development. So to do 3 seems like you might as well just do a townhome or a triplex type development versus going through the trouble of a cottage cluster, but maybe there's a good reason to do it. So we can set the minimum low. My guess is we'll always probably have a little bit more than 3. Comments?
Looks like Jesse.
That's a minimum of 3 per cluster, but, and I hear what you're saying, if you're just going to do a small lot, that why not just do a triplex? But if you were doing a larger lot, but you just had multiple clusters, there would be a reason to have a minimum of 3 because depending on what the lot's like.
For the cluster.
Yeah.
But would you say 3 is a good number, or would you say 4 or 5?
Well, I mean, it just depends on the lot, because you might run into a lot that's, you know, weirdly shaped, where it makes sense to have a smaller cluster, you know, in the corner or something like that. So I mean, I would just say the less restrictive the better, probably. And then I still think we need to define what a cluster is.
I knew that was coming. I promise we will define what a cluster is.
Looks like Jeff next.
Yeah, just real quick. I think 3 is a good number. One of the things that we're certainly focused on, which helps address I think some of the interaction between existing and infill, would be fee simple ownership, which cottage is easier to do as opposed to a triplex. Then you're almost guaranteed to have at least 2 non-owner occupied. And again, expanding ownership opportunities helps affect, you know, the health of the community. So that's where I think cottage would be better than a triplex. So 3 works.
Thank you, Jeff. Kathy?
Yeah, I just want to agree with Jesse and Jeff because of odd locations. 3, and in what Jesse is saying, you could have several common areas, and so one of the clusters might have 3 because of the shape of the parcel, and that seems like it allows the greatest flexibility. So I would agree with them on that.
Okay, so I'm hearing support for 3, which definitely makes sense. Maximum in the city is for cottage developments is 12. I see under minimum compliance, it's saying 8, but you can do more. So any thoughts on maximums? And Bill, I see your hands up, so I'm sorry if you could still provide comments on minimum too, if you would like.
Yeah, well, I had a question sort of, I'd appreciate if you could clarify the issue of that was raised about ownership. Are we talking about one lot that has multiple units on it? Or are we talking about something that's divided into fee simple lots like the townhouse arrangement? So what's the answer to that first? I mean, are either of those a possibility?
Jeff, I can try to tackle this unless you want to take it. I think the point in that statement was that triplexes are very challenging to divide into fee simple ownership. So with townhomes and cottages, those typically are a lot easier for that. But with a triplex, you're usually ending up with an owner, one owner and several renters of those properties, and financing that is a little more challenging sometimes, definitely for the lower ends of the economic scale. It typically is more of an investment property than it would be for, say, a first-time home buyer or even really a middle-income home buyer. I don't know, Jeff, if you want to say anything else on that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. We have developed both. In Redmond, we have a cottage development that meets the cottage code, but that is also on individual lots. And so it's an HOA rather than a condo association, which ends up being significantly more cost effective for the owners as well. In Cottage Grove, we built a true cottage cluster, and the whole thing had to be sold to an investor because we couldn't land divide it under the code there. So it's Bill, it's a little bit of semantics between a 3-unit townhome and maybe a 3-unit cluster. But the point, I guess, is the same, that it allows for more home ownership opportunities. Not that they're, of course, renting is a significant part of the value proposition for, a robust housing offering, but it lowers the ceiling or lowers the floor of what it takes to get into housing in a new way.
Well, I would agree with you. I mean, I think expanding ownership opportunities is a good idea, and having the option is a good idea. I guess my question was, what is the state, putting forward here in their definition of a cottage cluster? Is it several units on one lot, or can it be individual lots?
It can be individual lots.
It can be.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And I don't know if everybody's familiar with cottage clusters. Here's a couple pictures of ones that are in Bend. And I probably should have started with this. So this is in Northwest Crossings, but you could see this is a very recessed area. The roads are a lot higher. And so the cottage clusters, some of them front the street, but a majority of them, this would be considered a cluster here. And they all are required to front a certain amount of open space. And then they're alley loaded. So this serves similar to like what we were talking about, townhomes, like a private track or alley that provides access to their garages. But these units don't have any street frontage because they front onto open space. This is a picture of the open space with the cottages all fronting onto it. And these are individual ownerships. This is another one that was recently constructed in Northwest Crossings. And again, all these units in the back don't have lot frontage. It's these units here. They all front onto open space as well. And this is a cluster of 12, I believe. So they met the maximum under one development. And they actually have a little community building here and a little garden that's up behind it and a fireplace. This is one done under more like a planned development, but it looks and acts like a cottage development off Century. So you can see the little clusters. Here's a cluster and here's a cluster, and they all front onto common open space as well. Core just is under construction or maybe finished, Lynn would know, and they got a density bonus for this one. I believe they ended up with 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I believe, parking's up in the front.
Yeah.
And they all front onto open space. And then Audrey did this one for Habitat. And it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 lots, Audrey?
5. We had
5?
problem. Yeah, there were limitations for access.
So 5, and they all front onto this open space here. The only street that is access is right here. And then all the units front onto this open space here. And this is the off ramp right here. The parkway's right here, and then the off ramp onto Reed Market. So definitely a unique site. This is Jesse's cottage development called the Hiatus. And how many units did you end up having here, Jesse?
There are 22. That's not a fully updated plat. That lower unit is gone. From the,
this one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And this is where Jesse would like the definition of a cluster, because we don't define it. So this, could be considered one cluster. This is a cluster here around some open space. But it would be helpful for developers to define what is a cluster so that they can design to it.
And that's more, Pauline, that seems to be more to me about how the houses are oriented. Yeah, that's where the confusion seems to come in sometimes. Like when we were looking at that Brookswood project, we wanted to keep them, the houses basically straight across, even though they did front, maybe a common path or whatever. Do they need to be in some sort of half circle type thing?
Right. Okay, so that just gives you an idea of, let me get out of this PowerPoint now.
Pauline, while you're doing that, is it okay to open it up for a couple? And I'm not sure if these are comments or questions, but we have Jeff and Kathy with hands up.
Sure, yeah.
So Jeff?
I don't know how to put my hand down.
Oh,
my hand is up.
I'll get it for you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Oh, that's funny. I was just going to comment in terms of affordability by having individual cottages on their own lots. A smaller developer can build one, sell it, then build the next one, sell it, so that it helps with financing the project to have them on their own individual lots. That's how it was done on my Cottage Cluster and Sisters. They weren't all built at the same time. It was too expensive to do them all at the same time. So, but I think Bill explained his question. He was saying, does the state consider them both either all on one lot or individual lots? And I think you answered that they could be either or. So that's great. I just wanted to mention the affordability aspect of developing for a smaller builder to have that flexibility of individual lots.
Thank you, Kathy. Sarah?
Thanks, Pauline. I just wanted to get some clarification about what a cottage is, because I'm kind of surprised that those Northwest Crossing houses would count as a cottage cluster. I guess I'm just a little bit hazy on sort of what the square footage would be.
Yes, they definitely do. The Northwest Crossings has its own master plan chapter in the development code. They have their own section for a cottage cluster. It is pretty much identical to what the Bend cottage cluster code requires. They have a little, they had a larger square footage of 1,200, which ours bumped up to now 2. But other than that, I don't know too much of the differences between the two. So those are 1,200 maximum, 11 or 1,200 square foot units, single car garages. They all have to provide a certain amount of open space and parking.
Okay, thank you.
So on the cottage clusters, see if we can get through 1 or 2 of these. For lot size, we don't require lot sizes. So when you're looking at those pictures today that I just showed you, there's no minimum lot size for each of the units. Again, what is going to dictate how big their lots are for a cottage cluster, which is very unique compared to the other types of missing middle housing that we've talked about, is this open space requirement, private space requirement, and some other spacing requirements, maybe even between units. So We don't require a lot size today, and it's worked fine. The minimum compliance doesn't require a lot size either. It does have an option if there is interest. And then the model code says the cottage cluster shall meet the minimum lot size with depth standards that apply to single family detached. So that would be saying that I don't know if it means that the total, I don't know what that means. I don't think it means that each unit has to be on a 4,000 square foot lot, because then a cottage cluster is just not even doable. So is there interest in a lot size for each unit?
Looks like Bill has a hand up.
Yeah, so my question is, how does this relate to the small dwelling unit developments where there's a minimum lot size of 1,500 square feet?
So these are different because the minimum, those small dwelling unit developments are individual lots with street frontage. These cottage clusters don't have to have a street frontage. They have to provide open space. And then the small dwelling unit developments are much more restrictive on the size of the units. The maximum size of a small dwelling unit is 800 square feet. If you want 2 units on the lot, like let's say a house and an ADU, the cumulative square footage is 1,200 square feet. So you can have like an 800 square foot primary dwelling and a 400 square foot ADU, or you can have a duplex and have 2 600 square foot units. 1,200 max, but the primary unit can only be 800 square feet. Whereas in the cottage cluster developments, let me see where we get down to the size of the units. I believe we're at 1,200 square feet per unit.
Yeah, I think that's correct. The new code defines it differently. They talk about 900 square foot footprint.
Yes, and that is restrictive. We tried to get them to remove it, but it was too late. Unfortunately, because a lot of, cottage developments are single story structures, and they may want a 1,000 square foot single story or a 1,200 square foot single story.
Right.
But they can't now under this proposed cottage cluster because the footprint can only be 900.
So in Bend, the developer would have to use the existing cottage housing code and not this new cottage cluster code.
If that is their interest of
having
single
1,000
stories,
square feet. Yeah. So,
but if they're starting from scratch and they think they can do, a 900 square foot single story, which we get plenty of ADUs that are 800 square foot single stories, 2 bedrooms. It'll just be up to them which one they want to use.
so in terms of your question about lot size, it seems like the size of the individual lots isn't so much an issue, but should we be concerned with the size of the development? Should there be a minimum size for all of the lots together? I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that, but I mean, could you have a so-called cottage cluster that's, 3 units and the whole thing is really tiny? And would that be desirable or not? I don't know the answer without seeing a picture, but does anybody have an answer or an opinion?
I have to look in our cottage code today to see if the parent parcel, if anything, I think I don't know, Audrey, you have your hand raised. If you want to go ahead and I'll look up our code today.
Yeah, just a quick note. I just think that if a developer or designer can make the stuff fit and follow the normal setbacks that are required and massing and all of that, that there shouldn't be a need for a minimum lot size. It either fits or it doesn't.
And I'm not seeing in our code today that the parent parcel has any minimum or maximums for the lot size. And when I say parent parcel, it's the development site before they divide it up into individual cottage lots. So back to the question here for just the individual cottage lots. I'm not hearing support for dictating a lot size. And what I am hearing is that there's support to do what we do today, where there is no minimum lot size required for each cottage unit.
And we do have a hand up from Kathy.
Okay.
Yeah, it's mostly a question. I know when we started all this, we talked about the fact that we wanted to keep our cottage code intact because it seemed to be working, and that there was this other cottage code coming down from the state. But I don't understand what the difference is and if we have to adopt the one that's coming down in the model code or not, if the one that we've got is working well. So it's more just of a question of like, why are we talking about this? Is this something that we have to do?
Yes, we have to. I asked Ethan if he's still on here, he can correct me. But because ours is more flexible, let's say we don't have that 900 footprint, then we're not in compliance with the OARs. So in order
So the
for us to-
difference is the 900 square foot footprint? And
that's one difference.
I see.
There's probably some others. So as we start going through this, we'll see what they are. Like not height. Here's the dwelling unit size. So we're different here. Parking, we could probably get more flexible on. They have some different requirements, I think, for the courtyard and open space requirements, where we say 400 here. Without like going through each of these, I don't know them off the top of my head, but there is slight differences where I feel comfortable keeping ours. Doesn't mean we can't make some slight adjustments. I don't want to dive too much into the code that we have today. And then creating this whole new cottage cluster.
So looking at it, they have 150 square feet per cottage for the, looks like for the courtyard area. So basically what they're proposing is smaller units, smaller courtyard in order to make it more affordable. Is that what they're thinking or trying to accomplish?
I think they took examples, and if Ethan's on here, he might have had to step off from different cities, and a lot of cities have not done this. So I don't think that they had a lot of information to use and just put this together.
Okay, well, as long as the one that we have, we can keep and it works for
Yes.
people, then this is just an option for people who might want to have smaller units in smaller area. So, okay.
I mean, technically, we want to expedite anything. I could put together a draft. I don't know if we need to necessarily go through and compare what we have today, because that's not really changing compared to what is in the model code or OARs. Or maybe we just discuss it at the next meeting and go through it together, and we'll create a draft that way. It's not going to look much different, but it will be a little bit different. Mike?
Well, yeah, I'm just not sure what needs to change. It's confusing not knowing what's different from what we're already doing and what we're required to do. So I apologize for my question. I'm just unclear on what we need to do here.
And maybe the best thing to look at is maybe I just delete what the city already has and just focus on creating this new cottage cluster. And don't worry about what we have today, because it's not going to change. We just need to focus on creating a code for what we are required to do for cottage clusters. Mike?
When you say what we are required to do, I think we need to remember there's a third path. A lot of the design standards, and I have to shout out Yahoo to Kathy when she says design by planning can be very awkward. We're not required to adopt either the OAR or the minimum, especially if we can show that these standards, especially the design standards, really don't mount to a hill of beans when it comes to our current code, does it cause an unreasonable cost or delay? That's the filter that HB 2001 set forward. And sometimes we get into this fine tuning of our design standards or in the siding standards, and we forget that's the filter. I don't see keeping our code causes unreasonable costs on these cottage housing types.
I don't know that we can go through the alternative siting and design standards to change a definition. I will run it by Ethan. Is there, and again, for the group, for us to propose this, and Mike may disagree, the alternative siting and design process, probably have to hire out because it's out of my area of expertise. The total, I have to approve the total time and cost of construction, including design, labor, and materials, the total cost of land, the availability and acquisition of land, including areas with existing development, the total time and cost of permitting fees required. There's quite a bit without going through all of it to suggest that we use what we have today. Is there interest from this group to explore that, or is there more interest from this group to keep what we have today and create another development alternative, which would be called cottage clusters? And I'm sorry, I realize we are at 2 o'clock, but Mike has his hand up, and then if anybody else has a suggestion, that'll give me better direction for the next meeting. Mike, then Bill, or yeah,
I was just going to suggest that you pull together a draft as you did at the beginning of this meeting, you know, and you know, try to pick some features here that you know, that would make it appealing, and maybe somewhat different than the current thing, so that developers could say, well, I can do A or B. I mean, the one thing I think, to Mike's point, is that I don't see anything under the city's current cottage code that would prohibit somebody from doing what this new, you know, cottage cluster would allow, except maybe the amount of open space, you know, on a square footage basis per unit or something like that. But
and the size of the units.
Well, but you could do a 900 square foot. You could do that. It's just, you know, Bend allows for something a little bit larger, but there's nothing prohibiting somebody from doing a 900 square foot footprint.
Right, right. We would just become more restrictive if we changed what we allow today to match.
Yeah, and it isn't clear that being more restrictive is necessarily better. I mean, my guess is this, if the state had to think this through 3 times, they might say that wasn't a very good idea.
No,
somebody probably just put a definition on the table and it got adopted.
Yeah.
So I would say, I think to be efficient here, maybe it would help if you just put a draft together that you think, you know, covers this, and then we can, you know, talk about those details.
Okay. Okay. I think that might work, and then that it won't bring in confusion with what we have today. It's really just creating a new option for a developer to look at for developing their property. So it will just provide more options. Any other comments? Okay, sorry we went over. Up, Jesse.
Sorry, real quick. I think this is what you're saying. To me, it's just like we have good code for what we created already, so we keep that. And then I would just say we create this other code. The only thing that I would be interested in is if any of this code is less restrictive than what we have currently in the city. But I guess by creating that code, you'd be able to just use this second code if you wanted to use anything that was less restrictive. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So Jesse, when you're looking at developing, you know, that lot that we looked at recently together, we could compare the two and see which one would work better for you. You know, because you tend to do smaller units. So this 900 square foot probably wouldn't be an issue for you on the maximum floor area for the footprint. And some of the other stuff may work even better. So you'll just have more options, is how I see it, without stripping too much away from what we already allow today with our cottage code.
I mean, it would be nice to just have one code. I know we have to turn in a second code, but it would be nice to have one code that is the least restrictive. It would be a bummer if what you did is you looked at our code and said, "Oh, that I like that because that's really going to work." But then there's other parts of the state code that if ours is overall less restrictive, that'd be great. But it would just be a bummer if what was happening is we have this patchwork where, some items were less restrictive in one code and some items were less restrictive in the other code. And I don't know if there's a way to, to do that or not, because the Oregon code is what it is, I guess.
Yeah, I'll look at it. I'll dive into this a little deeper and just see what the differences are. And if I see something glaring that I think would benefit our existing code, I will definitely let this committee know as well.
That sounds great. Thank you.
All right, no more hands up. I'm going to send out another meeting invite. So I'm looking probably at March 3rd, probably 1 to 3. I just always coordinate with Lynn, and today she could only do 12 to 2. That's why we have the unique time. But my hope is then on March 3rd, we will do probably 1 to 3, but you'll get the meeting invite. So double check that time and we will get through Cottage Clusters then. And then the next meeting I'm hoping will be March 17th. And we will go through the odds and ends that we didn't finish that we still need to get through. And then following that meeting, I will hopefully finish up all the other code updates that I'm working on and be able to start really drafting what we've all worked on together. And then we'll set up a meeting to go through that draft. And I assume that'll probably take at least 2 meetings, but it'll be a lot cleaner to look at than this Excel chart that we've all been working off of. So 1 or 2 meetings there, and then, make changes. And then at some point shortly after, we'll have to go out to the public to start getting some feedback from the group that I have, a development code update group, and start the public process so that we meet some of the timelines that we were given for the grant that we're working under too. So a lot to do still in a short amount of time. I appreciate all your help and look for the meeting invite for March 3rd, but maybe block out your calendar, between 1 and 3, because I'm hoping that that's the time we'll be at. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Pauline.
Thanks again, Pauline. Great job.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pauline.
Look at garage doors and front doors as you drive around town.
Good idea.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.